A few years ago, a behavioral psychologist conducted an extremely simple experiment. No high-tech laboratory, no advanced technology, just a social test in a real-world environment. Two men participated in it. They looked very similar. Similar height, similar clothing, nearly the same level of attractiveness. Both were placed in the same environment, a social event full of people chatting, laughing, and getting to know each other. The task was simple: approach women and start a conversation. But there was one single difference between the two. One variable, two words, just two words that one of them said right at the beginning of the interaction. And this small difference completely changed the outcome. The first man had short, cool, and predictable conversations. The women responded politely, formal smiles, brief answers, and a few seconds later, the conversation simply died. He returned to the same place as always, ignored, forgotten. The second man, on the other hand, experienced something completely different. Almost immediately, something shifted in the dynamic. The women leaned slightly in his direction. Eye contact lasted longer. They laughed more easily. The conversation flowed. And often, they were the ones trying to extend the interaction. So the obvious question arises: what changed? The answer is surprisingly simple. Two words that completely shifted the energy of the conversation. And by the end of this video, you will find out exactly what they are. But even more important than the words themselves is understanding why they work. Because when you understand the psychological mechanism behind human attraction, one thing becomes clear. Most people play the social game completely blind. They repeat phrases. They copy behaviors. They memorize conversation lines. But they don't understand what's actually happening inside the other person's mind. And when you understand that, the dynamic changes completely. So stay with me, because what you'll learn here can forever change the way you start conversations, build connection, and influence how other people perceive you. Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, let me say something briefly. This channel doesn't exist to give surface-level advice. We're not interested in pre-made phrases or cheap social tricks. Here we explore something much deeper. The real psychology behind human behavior. Why some people dominate every social environment, why certain conversations instantly create connection, and why others die within seconds. Today we're going to dive into one of these invisible mechanisms. A simple psychological principle, but extremely powerful. A principle that can completely change how people respond to you. And it all starts with two words. But before we reveal them, we need to understand why they work. Because knowing what to say without understanding why it works is like owning a key without knowing which door it opens. So let's begin with a story. Marcus was 28 years old. He wasn't exceptionally good-looking, but he wasn't unattractive either. Average height, well-groomed appearance, stable job. By all conventional standards, Marcus was a perfectly normal man. And yet, every time he tried to start a conversation with a woman he was attracted to, something went wrong. He froze. His mind started desperately searching for the right thing to say. So he fell back on what almost everyone uses. "Hi, how's your evening going?" Or "What do you do for work?" The women responded politely, smiling, but something about the energy of the conversation felt off. It felt empty, like both were just fulfilling a social protocol. A few minutes later, the conversation ended, and they drifted apart. Marcus didn't understand what was happening. He was polite, respectful. He asked questions. He literally followed all the advice he had found about how to start a conversation. And still, nothing worked. Until one night, a close female friend decided to be brutally honest. She pulled him aside and said, "Marcus, can I tell you something?" He agreed. Then she said something that caught him completely off guard. "When you talk to me, it feels like I'm in a job interview." Marcus went silent, and she continued, "You ask the right questions, but it doesn't feel like a conversation. It feels like you're following a script." That hit him hard, because in that moment he realized something uncomfortable. She was right. Marcus wasn't having a conversation. He was executing a social protocol. Question, answer. Next question. No presence, no real curiosity, no energy. And there's a huge difference between a living conversation and a polite interrogation. That night, something changed. Marcus decided to stop trying to say the perfect thing and started saying something much simpler, the real thing. And interestingly, this whole transformation began with just 2 words. Now there's something most people completely misunderstand about attraction. They believe attraction is mainly visual, and yes, looks play a role in the first few seconds. Evolutionary psychology research shows that the human brain makes quick assessments based on visual signals. But the attraction that truly lasts, the kind that makes someone think about you hours later, the kind that makes someone think there's something interesting about this person, that form of attraction is created somewhere else. It's created from the emotional experience someone has when they're near you. And this is where neuroscience comes in. Researchers discovered something called mirror neurons. These brain cells have a remarkable property. They activate when you perform an action, but also when you observe another person performing that same action. In simple terms, the human brain mirrors the emotional state of the people around us. This means conversations don't just happen on the level of words, they happen on the level of the nervous system. When you start a conversation carrying fear, insecurity, the need for approval, the other person's nervous system picks up on it. Maybe they can't explain it, but something feels off, something feels tense, something feels artificial. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine someone who enters a conversation calm, present, honest, curious, without the need to prove anything, without fear of the outcome. When that happens, the other person's mirror neurons activate and something shifts. They feel more relaxed, more comfortable, more engaged. And that's exactly why some people seem to have a natural magnetism in conversations. Not because they say extraordinary things, but because their presence makes other people feel extraordinary. And now we finally come to the 2 words. The psychologist Carl Rogers, one of the most influential names in humanistic psychology, built a large part of his career on a simple but powerful idea. Every human being has a deep psychological need, the need to be truly understood. Not judged, not analyzed, not evaluated, simply understood, to feel that someone has really seen you, not the social mask, not the polite version, but you. Rogers called this empathic resonance, and over decades of research and clinical practice, he noticed something fascinating. People who could evoke this feeling, even for just a few minutes, were perceived completely differently. More interesting, more trustworthy, more charismatic, more magnetic. And this didn't just happen in romantic contexts. It happened in friendships, partnerships, business, social influence. Because when someone feels that you've perceived something unique about them, a psychological door opens, and this is exactly where the 2 words come in. So let's return to the central question. What are the 2 words? The 2 words are, you seem. Now, when many people hear this for the first time, the typical reaction is, seriously, that's it. But this reaction happens because most people don't understand what's actually happening on a psychological level when these words are used correctly. The phrase you seem activates multiple social mechanisms simultaneously. First, it signals genuine observation. When you begin a sentence with you seem, you're communicating something very specific. I've noticed you. Not the environment, not the phone, not my own thoughts, you. And in the modern world, where most conversations happen on autopilot, being truly noticed is rare. And when it happens, the brain registers it immediately. An instant feeling of attention is created, almost of intimacy, because someone isn't just looking at you, they're perceiving you. And that immediately sets you apart from most social interactions that person has had that day. But there's another reason why this phrase works. It creates curiosity without pressure. Observe the difference between 2 simple sentences. You are adventurous versus you seem adventurous. The first sounds like a judgment, the second sounds like a discovery. You seem is not a final conclusion. It's an open observation, almost as if you're saying, I've noticed something interesting about you and I'm curious if I'm right. This small space of uncertainty creates something extremely powerful. Curiosity. The person feels the urge to respond, to confirm, to correct, to explain, or simply to ask, why do you think that? In other words, you're not ending the conversation. You're opening a door for them to walk through. And there's a third mechanism. The phrase activates something deeply human, the impulse to talk about oneself. Researchers at Harvard University discovered something interesting about the human brain. Talking about ourselves activates the same reward centers connected to basic pleasures like food or money. In neurological terms, sharing something about ourselves is rewarding. We literally experience pleasure doing it. Now imagine what happens when you say something like, "You seem like someone who doesn't settle for ordinary." Immediately, something activates in the other person's mind. They want to respond. Maybe by asking, "Why do you think that?" Or by saying, "Actually, you're right." Or even, "No, you're completely wrong." But regardless of the answer, something important has already happened. They've emotionally entered the conversation. The interaction has stopped being superficial. A small psychological connection has been created. But there's a crucial detail that many people ignore. These two words only work if they're followed by a specific observation. Not generic compliments, not sentences anyone could say. For example, "You seem very beautiful." That doesn't create the same effect, because that's not an observation. It's just a compliment, and generic compliments are predictable. Most people have heard something like that countless times. Now observe the difference when real observation is present. Something like, "You seem like the kind of person who laughs at their own jokes before they even finish telling them." Or, "You seem like someone who's seen more of the world than most people here." Or even, "You seem much more interesting than you're letting on right now." Notice the difference? You're not just saying something nice, you're reflecting a perception, something specific, something personal, something that indicates you were actually paying attention. And when someone feels they've been perceived in a unique way, the conversation changes. Now the structure becomes clear. "You seem" plus a specific observation, plus implied curiosity, equals psychological connection. This is exactly what changed everything for Marcus. After the honest conversation with his friend, he decided to try something different. A few days later, he went to another social event. The same type of environment, the same dynamic as always. But this time, he let go of the old pattern. No more so, "What do you do for work?" Instead, he approached a woman who was leaning against the bar. He observed her for a few seconds, smiled slightly, and said, "You seem like someone who has a history with this place." He paused briefly and added, "Like you've been here before, under completely different circumstances." She was silent for a moment, then started laughing. Her eyes lit up, and almost immediately, she began telling a story, a long, detailed one, about the first time she'd been to that bar. That night, she had just come from the worst job interview of her life. She was frustrated, tired. She decided to order the most expensive drink on the menu, almost like a small act of rebellion against the terrible day. And in a strange way, that decision led to a conversation with the bartender. A conversation that became a friendship, and that friendship, sometime later, turned into a business partnership. Marcus barely had to speak. He just listened, asked small questions, reflected what she said, and at some point commented, "You seem like someone who turns disasters into adventures." She smiled again, and at that point, something was already clear. The conversation wasn't forced. It just happened because Marcus had finally understood something most people never notice. People don't just want to talk, they want to be seen. Later, when Marcus asked how that conversation had felt to her, the answer was unexpected. She said it was one of the most interesting first conversations she'd ever had. Now think about something simple. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for something fundamental, to be noticed, to be perceived, to be seen beyond the surface. And yet, most social interactions run on autopilot. Predictable questions, predictable answers, conversations that start and die a few minutes later. But the person who learns to truly observe changes this dynamic completely. Because when someone feels that you've perceived something unique about them, a psychological door opens. The conversation stops being superficial and becomes memorable. And this is the real principle behind everything we've seen today. It's not just about two words, it's about a shift in perspective. Instead of trying to impress, observe. Instead of wanting to seem interesting, discover what's interesting about the other person. Instead of repeating empty questions, reflect something you truly noticed. And when you do that, something interesting happens. People start feeling differently when they're around you, more comfortable, more open, more engaged. And that's how real social magnetism is created. Not from perfect sentences, but from genuine attention. Everything starts with two words, "You seem." But behind them is something deeper. Presence, curiosity, perception. Marcus discovered that. And now, so have you. If you've made it this far, comment perception in the comments. That way I'll know you really watched until the end. And if this video gave you an insight, leave a like. That helps the channel reach more people who want to understand the real psychology of human behavior. Subscribe to the channel, and if you want to dive even deeper into these topics, psychological power, human behavior, and social strategy, consider becoming a channel member too. I'll see you in the next video.